Councillor McKenzie, seconded by Councillor Hickey. Thank you. And on the question, all those in favor? Thank you. Anyone contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. That motion is carried. Okay, so the theme of today's meeting, so hey, there's Councillor Blake. Good morning, Blake. So the theme of the meeting today is really around, we've had response to COVID-19. We're going to talk about economic recovery, and we're going to talk about long-term planning today. So really great discussion today during our meeting. Really looking forward to it. So thank you for all the effort that has gone into this. And I just want to say thank you before we get rolling to all of those that have had their hand in the playbook that didn't exist 8 weeks ago. You know, what was COVID-19? What was coronavirus 3-4 months ago, on top of, you know, the restructuring work that we're doing, the growth work that we're doing around the work of the advisory committee and economic development realignment, the work that we've been doing on transformational reforms. So all that to say to those staff that are online today, those agencies that are online with us today, and to the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other staff in the city, provincial officials and others, thank you for all the amazing effort that you've put forth on behalf of citizens. It's really been inspiring. So thank you for all those efforts. So with that, we'll move into item 1.2, the economic recovery planning, and go right into our first item. And I apologize, I should know who I'm turning that to, but it looks like perhaps Ms. Hamilton, are you introducing, or right to Phil?
Your Worship, I'll introduce. Okay. I'll be starting the first part of the presentation this morning.
Okay.
So good morning, Your Worship and members of the Growth Committee. We're pleased to present this morning recommendations related to St. John's Municipal Recovery Plan, and specifically how the city can play its part in helping to rebuild the local economy after the pandemic. So today's presentation will be in 3 parts, and perhaps Mr. Ouellette can just go on to the next slide. So I'll start with a bit of overview of the city's recovery efforts to date, and then turn it over to David Dobbelstein, who will share some of the research locally, which sheds some light on how the COVID pandemic is impacting the St. John economy. And Ville Ouellette will present the third part, which is recommendations with respect to the City of St. John's Municipal Recovery Plan, including some thoughts on early short-term wins. Next slide, Phil. So the City of St. John has been very much ahead of the curve in supporting economic and community recovery. Virtually every area of the organization has taken steps to support recovery efforts, and this presentation will highlight some of the more significant examples of municipal support. So I won't cover all of them in this, but some of the key examples. Certainly to support community recovery, the city has maintained public access to parks and public spaces, and reinstituted key programs linked to cleanliness and beautification of the city, such as the recent reinstatement of street cleaning and sidewalk sweeping. There have also been flexible payment programs that have been put in place by the city's water and electrical utilities, along with a number of innovative tools. And one example is a how-to guide for building owners on how to safely reopen and flush out water systems in occupied buildings. The city is also strategically pursuing federal and provincial stimulus programs to advance some of the critical infrastructure projects, particularly those that are linked to growth. Next slide, Phil. As a landlord, the city has also provided support by way of rent deferral for tenants of facilities such as the city market, and move forward with a number of improvement projects. A great example is the market slip dredging project which will enable docking space for boaters during this upcoming summer season. The city has also maintained valued transit and parking services, which are certainly critical to maintaining, supporting economic recovery, and continually adapted its operations to ensure public safety and to meet customer needs. Next slide, Phil. With the city's workforce transitioning back to work, there are significant efforts underway to roll out operational plans to enable a safe return to work, and opening this week of some of city offices to support return to a new normal. In this period of time, we have very much leveraged our IT capabilities to deliver virtual services, including online council, committee, and staff meetings to enable critical governance and other services to continue. Importantly, the city has also leveraged digital tools to generate analytics to better understand the economic impact of COVID, and we will be sharing some of this data later in the presentation. Next slide. Sustaining vital growth-related services have been a continued priority for the city and its partners to support economic recovery efforts. The city's virtual one-stop development shop has been operational since the end of March and is now delivering permitting and inspection services both virtually and now by appointment, and is also holding virtual Heritage Board, Planning Advisory Committee, and pre-application meetings. While we saw initially a slow start to the building season, development activity has ramped up in the last few weeks, and with nearly $1 million of construction approved last week alone, and 3 times that amount in the queue for upcoming approval. This activity is very much visible with 2 construction cranes on the city's skyline and contributing to positive momentum in our construction sector. Tremendous work has also continued with many of our economic development and community partners to support recovery efforts, and we are pleased to have some of our partners joining us today. Hopefully it's clear from the presentation that that recovery efforts have really been front and center for the City of St. John. And while we've only touched on a few examples today, these considerations have guided our decision-making on service delivery really since the transition to essential services model back in March. Formalizing our municipal recovery efforts into a robust plan will position the city to strategically target areas where municipal support is most needed. With that, I'll now turn it over to David Doppelstein, who's our Manager of Population Growth, who will share with you some research on the local economic impact as a result of the pandemic, which will be key to informing our efforts going forward.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Good morning, Your Worship and Councillors. So, as I'm sure everyone is aware, COVID-19 has had a significant impact on both the local economy and the global economy. The good news, if you could put it this way, is this is not just a St. John problem. It's not something that we have done wrong or we have done really poorly on, and all of a sudden it's only affecting us. It's impacting the whole country and the whole global marketplace. The unemployment rate in St. John in April 2020 is 9.9%. So to get a sense of what this means, the normal baseline for Greater St. John is somewhere around 6.2 to 6.3%, or around 4,300 people. So Statistics Canada, when they did their monthly labor force survey, found out that that number had raised to about 6,400 in St. John. So we have about 2,000 more people out of work due to COVID than would be typical. The thing to bear in mind, though, is the way that the labor force survey works is it only monitors people who are actively looking for work. So if people were laid off but intending to go back to work, it doesn't measure those people. Or if they've been laid off or lost their job and are not looking for work because all the businesses were closed in their sector, they also wouldn't be accounted for. So we suspect this number was probably higher. The good news is, though, the province is moving on to the 3rd phase of recovery. We're going to start seeing more businesses open by the end of this week. The other interesting thing about COVID-19 is this is a Main Street phenomena. So the International Monetary Fund, when looking at the Great Depression that started in 1929, it was viewed as an impact that affected mostly big business. So large-scale industry and large businesses would have lots of sweeping layoffs. Now, large-scale industry is still hurting here, but the people who are most hurting in this situation are the businesses on Main Street. So primarily small and medium enterprises, businesses who might not have the floor space to be able to socially distance properly, or might not be offering essential services. So there are some companies that have done very well through this and some that are not doing well. And as we move through into recovery phase, it's still, just because businesses will be allowed to open, the recovery will be a little slow. The other factor for the city that will impact us is a halt in international migration, because the provincial borders are closed to non-essential travel as well as the Canadian borders. Just before the lockdown, we were actually seeing the highest growth we've seen in a while. It was 10% higher than last year. And what we're hearing from newcomers is that this is not canceling their plans to move here, it's just delaying it. So we're monitoring this closely and still working with newcomers who are intending to move here. The other aspect this will have on the economy in St. John in particular is a limited cruise ship season. Now, we still don't want to speculate as to what that will mean in St. John, but the CEO of the Port of Halifax yesterday at their AGM is anticipating no cruise ships in Halifax. So without predicting what that will mean here, we can estimate, though, that there'll be significant impacts, even more than there already have been. And then our airport is expected to still have lower passengers for the foreseeable future. And this in particular will impact our hospitality sector in other ways. Next slide, please. So this slide, might be a little hard to read, illustrates sort of the percentage of workforce that was laid off last month because of COVID-19. I won't go through all of this, but you'll start to see themes in the next couple of slides that there are certain sectors that seem to be hurting a little more than others just by the nature of their work. So as would be understandable, accommodation and food services sectors were probably hardest hit by layoffs. So these are things like hotels, bed and breakfasts, restaurants. Understandably, if they don't have customers, it's hard to keep staff on. But we're also seeing, obviously, a large impact on the healthcare sector. These would be private clinics, dentist office, medical clinics, and daycares, which were closed up until this week. The arts and culture and recreation sector also was very hard hit by this. Even with changes to social gatherings, we still don't know how some of this sector will recover if groups can't congregate in large amounts. So places like the Imperial Theatre, which have hundreds of seats, may not be able to fully be utilized. Same with Harbour Station. And the province has said in the mandatory order that large-scale events are prohibited until the end of this year. So we're still monitoring how that will impact the broader economy, but that is also a way that we attract more people here, both temporarily and permanently. And a lot of those events will support local businesses typically, and so without them here, it's going to be even more important for our economy to shop local and support local business. We're also seeing impacts on retail trade, though some retailers have been able to deal well with the new protocols, especially big box stores or that we're offering essential services like grocery stores, the Walmarts of the world. They actually have physical space and able to allow social distancing. One of the challenges moving forward is, even with these new allowances, some of the stores don't have footprints to allow for social distancing, and that's one of the things that we'll be looking at is how can we ensure that the city can support local shops. Next slide, please. So this highlights staffing actions that are taken by New Brunswick businesses during COVID-19. And as you can see, over 43% of all businesses in New Brunswick laid off staff. And many staff are still laid off. Now, obviously, there are federal and provincial programs to support those affected employees, but this certainly affects business. And we don't know the time frame at which people will be brought back. It will depend sector by sector, business by business. We're seeing early reports that even businesses who are permitted to now open are still cautious because there are certain expenses with opening fully that if they don't have the right customer base, they're going to end up losing money. We've also seen businesses reducing their staff hours or shifts. But then conversely, there are some sectors and businesses that are impacted nearly as severely, and just over a quarter of businesses didn't lay off any staff at all. So that is sort of a bright note in this. Next slide, please. This is sort of a sober slide. This sort of tells a tale of which sectors have lost business. Now, this is countrywide. This isn't just New Brunswick per se. But as you can see and suspect, accommodations and food services, very hard hit. Over 40% of that entire sector is down with revenue of over 50%. Some more, some 80, 90% of revenue lost. Again, arts and entertainment sector really hard hit. The education services sector, healthcare sector. Other services, this is basically anybody doing repairs. This would include nail salons, barbers, sort of that service industry as well. So again, a lot of sectors are hard hit. A very sobering statistic that just came out with the Greater St. John Chamber for their impact survey. The businesses that they surveyed, almost 30% are concerned they may be forced to close permanently within the next few months if things don't get better. So that's something that we're looking at very closely, and obviously the province and the federal government are also looking at very closely. So next slide, please. So what we've done is we've just taken, with our GIS team, we've done a hotspot analysis of some of the sectors that are most impacted, just to illustrate sort of their geography and where they're located, and also to illustrate that the commercial sector in St. John, well, predominantly is uptown St. John, also is other parts of the city, and we have to bear that in mind as we're looking into recovery. So obviously with accommodations, we would have a large cluster in our uptown, but then we also have hotels and accommodations on our east side, and then parts of our west side as well. Next slide. This is the same illustration with arts, culture, and economy, and some recreation services. Again, there's some clustering in our Central Peninsula, but you're seeing clustering as well in other parts of the city, which we also have to be aware of. And then next slide, please. And then this slide highlights the clustering of restaurants and fast food. So obviously we know there's a predominance of restaurants in our uptown core, but there are a number of restaurants and fast food places throughout the city, many of whom would not have parking lots that they could expand into. And we know a lot of the restaurants have moved to a takeout model, and that's certainly something that we're watching very closely as well as we talk about recovery and what the city can do next. So I'll turn it over to Phil Willett, our Deputy Commissioner of Growth and Community Planning.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Jacqueline. I think those two presentations were very important for context. Number one, that we're not starting at zero is a really important starting point, and as well, from David's standpoint, is that we're doing some analysis and some investigation to inform how we should support a recovery. And essentially, we have a goal of this municipal economic and community recovery approach. And it's to accelerate local economic and community activity. And the caveat here is that we are not trying to duplicate. We do not want, this is not because others are not doing enough. It's what should the city do? And I do want to run through a little bit of what this means. For the most part, this municipal economic community recovery approach is one that will bring together municipal officers across the administrative areas of the city to determine what it is we can do, the City of St. John, from the input that we're receiving to facilitate and accelerate that recovery. And that means our own programming, our own investments, our own facilities, our own land. And it will require some creative thought on what it is our role ought to be into supporting recovery. Absolutely, it will require a significant amount of collaboration with a variety of partners in the community. We think this is an opportunity to just reaffirm the things that we love about St. John and what makes us resilient and what makes us strong. And this planning that we are proposing, which you'll get more information here as we go along these slides, will support that. The other, caveat here is that we absolutely have to respect the level of social distancing mandatory orders that are in place. And this is by no means a carte blanche to do whatever it is we need to do for recovery. No. But there are limits to what we can do, but we think we can work within those limits. And we think that the community can, and we think that the community is excited for that. And as Jacqueline mentioned as well, support towards upcoming federal stimulus programming. So I just wanted to very quickly clarify, this is not simply for the economy, it's also for the community. And, I think we have a pretty good idea of what is meant by the economy, but for the community, we're interpreting that quite broadly. That's the arts, culture, recreation, wellness, civic pride, neighborhoods, parks, and public spaces. So it is broadly stated. So these efforts will not just be for the bottom line of the economy. It will also be to support these organizations and groups and citizens that are involved in these particular areas. And, it should also be that both of them are speaking to each other. So from the community perspective, it only is supporting the economic recovery and vice versa. Just a couple more limitations here before I get into some of the kind of details. We are not trying to duplicate. We do not want to mimic the ability of what federal and provincial governments have historically done. And we don't have the money for it. So we don't have the same amount of money as Prime Minister Trudeau, and we don't have the same amount of money as Premier Higgs. But we do have a role, and this is what this plan is trying to define. We will focus on what we have historically been able to accomplish and successfully deliver, and within our own authority. And also, this is not a giant plan to encompass all other plans. There's tons of work going on in recovery at a provincial, local, community, business, federal level. And this is not a plan to say, hey, give us all your plans and we'll coordinate it. Absolutely not. This is simply focused on what the City of St. John should do to support recovery. So this slide basically breaks down how we will go about doing this. And I'd picture this less like one deliverable and multiple deliverables. So we're not seeking to release a plan here. We're looking to deliver a whole bunch of wins over a period of time. And we will kind of collect feedback as we go. There will be the green section there is the kind of approval process to make sure that we internally can approve these, and we're going to try to streamline that as much as possible. But the red section there, and really we'll be focusing on the two phases. We have to acknowledge that this is not just about today. Absolutely, we want programming. We want to take initiatives today. We are hearing about needs today, and we will identify and we will present to you shortly some of those initiatives that will seek your approval from the committee. But we also have to acknowledge at some point the loosening of social distancing and mandatory orders will occur, and we shouldn't wait for that moment to occur. We can start planning in advance. We can start saying, yes, that someday there will be an event available for a maximum capacity of 50 people. We don't know when that is, but we shouldn't wait till that happens. We should start thinking about how we enable that today. And then, the third box, which is a longer term thinking, but still important for this recovery, is what's the new normal? We have a vaccine. Everybody is now safe. We've kind of fully defeated COVID-19. It is a success story that we've done it as a society. But what does that mean for us today? What do we do? What do we do as a community? And what are those particular protocols that would have to be in place in order to uphold the level of safety for our citizens? So, that's something else that we have to be prepared for. For St. John, and now we're getting into what we're doing. We cannot do this alone as a municipality, and we know that that's not the case, and we know that it's already happening all over. We need community partners to participate. We need leaders of industry to participate as they are. We need arts and culture communities to participate. And the innovation that we are looking for program delivery is not exclusively to the city. It will require a broader audience to deliver, and we really look forward to rolling that out. Another one, and from the feedback that David gave, one of the things that we can do as a municipality is drive volume and customers to those impacted organizations and businesses constructively. So we got to think about what does that? What is it? What would allow for those increased levels of customers to access those areas and to make it that much easier for them to support this recovery effort from a broader economic standpoint. Also, for us, this is a under promise and over deliver. let's focus on delivering one initiative per month. If we can do 2, if we can do 3, that's great. But one initiative, let's roll it out once a month. What we can do on the ground, and we should do that on a consistent basis. So again, not looking to present to you, 70 different initiatives that we'll do over a year and a half. Let's just try one at a time, get it right, and present it as we get the information that's needed. So what are we investigating now? A whole bunch. We have a list of about 35 different ideas, and that list is growing. We are looking at changes to or new grant or incentive programs that would enhance the existing ones that we have and to complement them. Priorities and timing of capital budget projects within the city, whether there's impacts to those local businesses, again, that David showed on those maps, whether there's considerations that are needed for those capital projects. The initial indication is that there is not, but we will continue to investigate that. Alternatives to our regular civic celebrations. What else can we do? How else can we deliver? Animating city-owned land, facilities, and parks that are primarily dormant at this time. How else can we do that? And how can we ask the private sector as well as the community sector to help us animate those particular areas? So we already have an RFP for Loyalist Plaza. Well, what other sites are there across the community that might be able to be animated temporarily for the support of recovery? And absolutely, we're looking into street closure initiatives. So we have a list of 3 immediate initiatives that we will be seeking your feedback on and a recommendation to present it to council. And they include these 3. So one is the night market for the city market. There's a recent indication from the province that markets they are allowing for markets. And last year we had what I believe is a phenomenal Thursday night market experience for St. John residents, visitors, and we want to do that again, and we will do that again. We have a lot more work to do, but there is interest from those who are interested in resourcing the different booths, and we do believe that we can accomplish this by mid-June, and we are working through the details of that, but the night market is a go. We are going to do it, and we will give you more information once we have that information. But that is one thing that we think we can do. The next one is pivoting of 2020 arts and community grants. So this one is an interesting one in that we had already submitted or we'd already distributed funding across a variety of organizations in the community. I think there's a total of 58 community grants and 24 arts grants. And when we checked with these groups, especially those who are delivering project-based initiatives, earlier in the year, soon after COVID, what are you doing with your projects? A lot of them were very timid, as you could imagine, and they were initially thinking that they needed more time and potentially deferring until 2021. As time progresses, we, the city and these organizations themselves under their own initiative have really committed to doing something in 2020. They want to be doing something in 2020. And I think this is a great success story for our community. Again, it's not only the city that's doing this, it's our community organizations. And I do have a couple examples that I would like to share with you. So one of them is an arts grant recipient, which is the St. John chapter of the Asian Heritage Society of New Brunswick. And they'd receive $3,000. And for those of you who have celebrated some of the Asian Heritage Month initiatives, it's usually a large gathering. It's a great event. It's a whole bunch of different communities brought together, and they've obviously could not do that the way we have historically interacted with that event. But they have innovated, and they've gone virtual. And they've integrated a whole bunch of the Asian Canadian communities within that initiative. And the virtual, it's amazing the stuff that they're doing, the virtual delivery that they're doing all through the month of May. Our cultural dances, they're profiling traditional singing, cross-cultural dance and singing. They are allowing members from these communities to upload and to share. There's origami, there's art exhibits. So there's a bunch that they're doing to innovate in using that opportunity to pivot their pre-existing plans to deliver new and important programming for the community. Another one is a community development grant recipient, Gentle Path Counseling Services, who have a partnership with Carleton Community Center, will be offering multi-service counseling programming, which includes the new Zoom face-to-face approach and phone calls to provide that particular service. And this will be to Westside residents starting by the end of May. These are for short-term group mental health programs for children, youth, and parents and women in distress. So, they've had to adapt their programming, and it was not what they were intending, but they innovated to deliver that particular service, and it's a great service. I have others to share, but they're all in this. They're all in this together. They're all doing this. These groups are all thinking about this. I should say that the majority of programming is likely to be. I asked the question to the program officers: when are these going to happen? So, are they all happening now, or are they all going to happen this summer? A lot of them has been pushed back to the fall, so they need more time, and they think that the projected social distancing in the fall would be more ripe for the delivery of their programs. So, but some are still, as you could tell, still moving right away on their program delivery. The third is street closure. So, street closures are a mechanism that other communities have used to support and enable economic recovery and acceleration of economic recovery. And for us, we are reviewing these options. We are not going to dive in and say there is a right option yet. We believe there is more work to be done. There is a variety of options as it relates to street closure. Each street closure will require both kind of some broad-based consultation, but also some specific consultation. So if we were going to close one particular street, absolutely, we have to check in with those folks that are on that street to make sure that this is something that would be helpful for recovery and is not too intrusive or challenging for them as it relates to recovery. So a lot of excitement on street closure in terms of what can be done. We're not jumping the gun here on this one. We think there's some more work to be done, and we will commit to coming back in a month with recommendations and kind of feedback that we've received through some of the additional due diligence that we have. So this is a more to come initiative. Lastly, we are seeking three recommendations to council through the Growth Committee. One is to receive and file the presentation. The second is to direct the city manager to proceed with the implementation of the immediate initiatives as identified. And then also to direct the city manager to return to the Growth Committee in June with direction on street closure options for St. John. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Can we just stop screen sharing for a moment just so I can see faces? And okay, thank you. Questions, comments? Councillor McKenzie, you kick us off.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is an excellent report, Phil. I didn't have a chance to go through it, but one of the comments that I will make is street closure, I think, is actually absolutely imperative for the uptown restaurants right now. Right now, they're required to open at 50% capacity. It's impossible, absolutely impossible. And I think waiting another month, I think we're going to lose businesses. I think that even if we could, for the next 2 weeks, sort of put a one-way traffic thing in and give them the opportunity to put some tables out and help them out. I know you don't want to jump the gun on this, but at the same time, we got to reduce the risk of people losing their businesses because we're taking extra time on it. So if we could do a one-way traffic plan for the uptown and tell people if they're allowed to put tables out, that might, and we got a better plan coming within, a month, 60 days, whatever. I I'm really not comfortable waiting another month before we come up with a possible plan. I think we need to be better. Other than that, I'm happy with the report.
Thank you. City Manager, do you want to make a comment?
Chair, through you to the councillor. The reason we want a little bit more time here is not so much that we can't move quickly, because we can. The businesses are, if you will, based on our initial stakeholder engagement, evenly split on whether or not a street closure would be a good thing for their business. Half of them think it would be a good thing. Half of them say, please don't do it. And I think it's because it's too raw right now. They were just allowed to open last week. They're still trying to figure out how they would do it. They're very much concerned that a street closure may affect their pickup and drop off capability that they've currently established, where cars literally drive up, someone hops out, grabs the stuff and drives away. So I think we just need to give it a bit more time to get the input from the businesses as the mandatory order loosens off some restrictions, whether or not they think it's a good or a bad thing for them. But right now they're evenly split. It's not self-evident to every business that they believe that closing the street in front of them would be a good thing. They like the cars being able to drive up the street, park in front of their business, and walk out and go straight in the doors. And they're not supportive of the street closure. So we have some more work to do with those who will be affected before we can come to council with a firm recommendation. So it's not that we're dragging our heels on it at all. I think it's just a little bit too raw right now for the business owners to make their determinations.
Okay, and just to respond to that, City Manager, the preferred method is not to have drive up and take out. The preferred method is to try to get as many people in the restaurant as they can at social distance. So I understand that people are against the street closure because right now they're relying on the drive-up traffic. But that transformation is going to take place at some point. The sooner it does, the better it is for those businesses. On the other thing I just thought of now, are we encouraging people to put patios out at no charge this year to try to get them, to put out patios and not charge them for the parking spaces like they do in the past?
We've had that discussion. The city's approach so far is that we don't waive fees. We have it for tenants, we have it for taxis, we have it for anybody who has asked us to waive fees. However, we do have the growth reserve. And the growth reserve, council has already supported that 80% of that growth reserve can be used for recovery initiatives. So the growth team is looking at whether or not one of the ways we tap into the growth reserve is to waive the permit fees. Again, you need to ask yourself, where does that begin and where does that end? We're also turning to Uptown St. John, and Uptown St. John has a role to play, certainly in the Uptown, in terms of supporting the businesses that have contributed to the BIA over the last while. So there are options whereby businesses would not have to pay the fee directly, including our growth reserve, and that is being looked at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just to build on very quickly, and then we'll go. I think to your point, City Manager, it's interesting that both Moncton and Fredericton had a CBC story, just to speak to the complexity, Councillor McKenzie, of that in fact they didn't want street closures. So again, and maybe their communities are split as well. So I think a good message around urgency, though, Councillor McKenzie. Thank you. I think I had Councillor Hickey, and then I had the Deputy Mayor. Councillor Hickey.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks, Phil, for the presentation. A couple questions around street closures, because I guess I'm a bit more hesitant than jumping feet first into it, because based on my conversations with restaurants and business owners in the area, is that this isn't necessarily the end-all be-all that, in the quick win that we make it out to, that it may be. I mean, when we look at, the mayor brought up a good point. When we look at Moncton and Fredericton, they've already opted away from options like that. And, my conversations with those business owners say that, we're dealing with companies and small businesses that have already razor thin margins. The average restaurant only runs about a 5% profit margin. So when we're asking them to, okay, well, now we're going to close your street and that further investment needs to be made, for a lot of them, it's just not worth it. And certainly the challenge becomes, well, how do we build that balance with growth? So I guess my question is, and I appreciate the city manager's perspective, but my question is, how do we build that consultation? How do we work with the BIA? I've heard rumors of the BIA having done consultation and a report based on this. Is that something that's going to be made available to us? If Moncton and Fredericton are steering away, how can we get to new, more creative ideas around this? In particular, when you look at Fredericton talking about community spaces and building those as one, I mean, we already have tremendous assets like that, whether it's Queen Square, King Square, Market Square, whatever it is, we have those spaces existing. Can we work to maximize those without changing the dynamic of the street if it's not what works for business?
I'll maybe try to take that one, and it's a great question, Councillor Hickey. For the city, and this is kind of what we wanted to do, is I think the growth committee requires a pretty good briefing of the options. What are we talking about? You think maybe a street closure, you maybe think like a Moonlight Bazaar, like you close one end to the other. There's a variety of different options that we can look into. In addition to active transportation, we can look at single lane. We can look at kind of the parking area. So there's a lot, and it all has to kind of come back to what are we getting back from community partners and from businesses, and also how does it apply well across the city, not just for the uptown. So again, I think I naturally think of uptown first when you think of this, because you've experienced street closures in the uptown, but I don't know how that interacts with the rest of the community. So, part of what we are also establishing is criteria so that we make sure that any decision is not made for one community. It has to be fair. We want to make sure that we have the capacity to do it. So, for example, if every single day we're moving large concrete barriers, you could imagine the staff time and resources needed to do that if we were doing it day on, day off. So that might not be a great option from a capacity standpoint, especially with the limitations we currently have due to other financial restraints. So listen, there's a lot to kind of uncover. I think it is our responsibility as staff to come back to this body and say, here are your options. We've done the consultation for you. This is what we feel is the right thing to do at this stage. These are the risks of doing it, but we think it's the right one. Today, we just simply don't have that data. We have the options. We are excited to do it. And, from a staff point of view, all the staff are like, yeah, we can make this work. However, we don't necessarily have the data yet from those business communities.
No, thanks, Dalton. I appreciate the perspective. I guess I hope that's not where, I hope our decision making on this isn't necessarily rooted in those quick wins, because I want to make sure that we're making evidence-based approaches that are actually going to support the businesses, both in the uptown and in the region as a whole. Certainly, obviously in the more dense community, I think that social distancing becomes an even bigger challenge. But I guess that's where my concern comes from. One more on the patio fees. Aren't we only talking isn't that only $5,000?
Yeah. John, do you want to take that?
Yeah, Councillor, it's not the number. It's the precedent. All right. Everybody has an argument for not paying a fee, including developers for building fees and building permits, etc. So it's not the number. Any one we can do, but as soon as you do one, then every other organization has an argument to also be excluded from fees. So we have put aside money in the growth reserve for initiatives. If based on our analysis, we believe that waiving patio fees will truly spur growth and spur recovery, then we'll be coming to council with that recommendation. Right now, again, I know we want to move as quickly as possible, but we're doing all this for the benefit of the businesses. a lot of businesses haven't even yet decided what they're going to do or what they want to do moving forward through the summer. Some restaurants are still debating whether they're even going to open until more restrictions are lifted. So we want to work closely with the stakeholders, with those who will be affected by this, and make sure we're putting in place things that serve their needs. So we just need a little bit more time. Today, the intent was to tell you we're thinking about it. We're heavily engaged, and we will map out the options that make the most sense. The ones that we know will work and the ones that make sense right now, such as the night market, let's go. First night market will be as soon as the weather's better, kind of approach. But we are doing this for the benefit of the businesses, so we want to make sure that the businesses figure out what would be of benefit to themselves.
Right. Well, no, that seems like a good perspective. I guess I can't find I'm just trying to track down the slide with the recommendations. I guess my concern on the third recommendation, do we limit ourselves too much in specifying it to street closures, or should we change it to more of like a community adaptability perspective?
I think, Councillor, on that one, and Mr. Ouellette will speak to it, but I think there's been some background. That one has gotten a bit of press, so that's a specific area, is it not, Phil, that you're going to report back? Because that one's gotten quite a bit of press, but there's a whole range of other options and ideas that are being explored. Did I capture that the right way, Phil?
Yeah, no, through your worship, I think that's accurate. We already have started this work on the street closures. We're hoping to bring something to you today, but again, we're not quite there yet. The street closure is but one. I had mentioned earlier that we have, I think, 35 different initiatives being contemplated, and if you folks hear of some in the community, absolutely, we want to hear what those could be, and we'll investigate. And I think the approach that we want to take on a go forward is let's pick the highest impact, kind of quickest to kind of implement, while working on some longer term initiatives, and let's kind of deliver one a month. So we'll proceed with that. We'll update the growth committee as it progresses. I think for the growth committee, capturing those ideas from the community, and then you'll be evidently asked to support these ideas that come forward. For street closure, we will absolutely need your support, because from an initial standpoint, there is not going to be one absolute 100% win. There's always going to be somebody who might not like that idea. And that will be important for growth committee and council to be prepared for that, because we're not going to be delivering 100% good news to everybody with a street closure from my perspective.
Right. Okay. Well, as long as we're not limiting ourselves, I'd be happy to move the three recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a seconder for those?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to you, Deputy, and I see you, Councillor McKenzie. I'll come back. Deputy Mayor?
Well, I want to talk for a minute about activities, because I know it's very important to get the businesses going, but also because of COVID-19, our own citizens have been sort of kept in the house, and people are very anxious to get out and do something and enjoy the city, and we only have so many months to do it, of course. And the thing is that because of the restrictions of, I think as of today, it's only going to be 50 people. There's sort of some people that have already kind of thought about this and how we can do events for 50 people, and maybe do one every week or every so many weeks. It wouldn't involve necessarily any money from the city, but it would affect people all over the community. They could come if we do it in groups of 50. And the one thing the city could do, and I don't know where it stands, like we used to have an event calendar where we could, get people to be advised, because it's very hard to get the public sort of to know what's happening. And I don't know where that stands, but if we have somebody on staff that can kind of get that going, it would be a good thing to be able to do these events, because one of the hard things for the organizers will be, how do we get people to know about the event, because of the shortage of money, and because it's going to cost a lot more to just have activities for 50 people at a time. I'm just mentioning this because I think that all people, and many people I talk to, are concerned about, how can we get out there? Everything's canceled this summer. Like, you can't have a public event because you can't police the people. And, you can't control the number of people that will come, and then we'll be breaking the law. So I just bring that up because I know the recreation department, I've spoken to them, and they're concerned about whether we can get anything going for the summer, and I think we can. It's just how maybe we can get a little help from the city and either helping to advertise or put things together a bit. So I just mentioned that because it's so important, and that's part of growth, because people need to be happy and fulfilled that live in their city. So I wanted to bring that up. I have a couple of questions besides that, and one is just to clarify for planting. That was your first part of the presentation. I don't think we're doing any planting, are we, throughout the city because of cost? If I could just clarify that.
Your worship, members of committee, that is an agenda item for Monday evening for council, where we will lay out what is and is not feasible based on our current budgetary constraints. And then council will have to make the final determinations as to which things are in and out. So that is a subject for Monday evening.
Okay. And my other question was on market slip for the docking. Are we going to have a fee structure in place for that? Because we haven't been able to dock at market slip for quite some time. And last year, when the Port of St. John had docking facilities, and I don't believe that company's coming here this year, but there was a fee, and I'm in favor of that in a way, because I don't think that we should be just giving the docking abilities away free. So I just want some direction on where the city hopes to go on that.
To follow Deputy Mayor, we have the several proponents who are suggesting that they can operate that facility on our behalf. We're looking at that. We're looking at the various options, and before the docks are in and operational, we will have come to council with our recommendation.
Okay, I guess that's fine. And I think, though, going back to the thing about having activities, I think that's very important. And I think everybody should realize that it's going to be very difficult to have open public events this year. And I think that's going to take a lot away from our community, because we've had so much activity in the past where we have all kinds of public events. And whether you believe it or not, the city, people depend on those events to create a good lifestyle in St. John and be happy. So
let me assure you, Deputy Mayor, that the team that's looking at this is why we've separated out community recovery and economic recovery. The team is very much focused on exactly what you're suggesting. This is not just about handing out a little bit of money out of the growth reserve. And this is not just about trying to help businesses. It is about helping the community recover. So yes, they are absolutely looking at things that you suggested in terms of how do we enable smaller fun events, et cetera, within our green spaces moving forward. So all that is being looked at to be sure.
And just with you saying that, I just want to say there are people out there in the community now that you may not know about. And somehow we got to reach out to those people and make sure that we know what everybody's doing before we duplicate it, because there are people working on this right now to do some event in the city. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Deputy. Yeah, Councillor Strobridge, go ahead.
Well, I had a question. I mean, since we're the growth committee and we're talking about, economic recovery and stimulating the economy again, but this is a little bit of off topic, but I just wanted to, I was thinking about this. Where are we at with all of the vacant properties and things that we could be having on the market for sale? I know it was identified in the report that just came out.
Perhaps empty lots, and so that we own or other people own?
No, that the city owns.
Okay, thank you. City manager or Ms. Hamilton, I don't know if you want to take a crack at that. City manager's gone quiet. So Ms. Hamilton, perhaps, I mean, the EY report, if that's what you mean, Councillor, identified a whole range of assets that we have. But as the city manager has most recently said, I mean, that assumes that there's a market for them. So, we haven't moved on yet with that project. But I don't know who wants to take a crack. City manager, do you want to take a crack at that one?
I'll take the first crack, and then I'll ask Jacqueline to fill in the holes. We have not put for sale signs on municipally owned land around the city. But what Develop St. John did do last year, which was a tremendous undertaking and has already been beneficial, is they have a land inventory for the city. And the land inventory includes not only municipally owned land, but also vacant land owned by other entities, including in some cases the province. And they have that entire inventory available. So as they are going down around as our agent, trying to develop property in the city, which is their role at the end of the day, they have that land inventory that they share with interested parties. And Steve Carson, who's on the line as well, could probably chime in on that. We have not gone into an active, we the city have not gone into an active campaign to advertise that we have municipally owned land for sale. Quite frankly, we don't have much of it. And a lot of it is, there is no market demand for it. We do rely on Develop SJ to market on our behalf and encourage development on vacant land. Steve, do you want to pipe in before we have Jacqueline fill in any holes?
Sure, thanks, John. Yes, no, as you point out, we did do quite a very comprehensive land inventory system and updating that regularly. We've been focused primarily on the more strategic pieces of real estate, not only the city owns, but private sector developers own that are underutilized, that could create some large scale investment. We haven't got at this point, and we need to work with the city's real estate team as we go through the EY report on a number of the smaller pieces of property that need to be evaluated in terms of their marketability. We, as you know, Develop St. John was created to really look at the more strategic projects that could create a significant tax base. So we prefer at this point not to get off on focused on some of the smaller, less valuable pieces. But at the end of the day, someone needs to have that on their work plan. So that may end up through our discussions that we may be doing some of that as well. But we haven't had those discussions. And Jacqueline and I know with the reorg within the city as well, the property management side of the city is now moved into a new domain as well. So we probably need a small team to really go through the EY report and pick up who's responsible for each action.
Ms. Hamilton, I'm not sure we left you much there, but we'll give it over to you as well.
Yeah, I think the bases have been covered. I will add that there are a number of programs that we deliver that support development and marketing of vacant properties more broadly in the city, including the city's urban development incentives program is aimed at stimulating development of vacant lots and vacant buildings. And the city also launched last year a property match application program, which again is looking at matching. It's a matchmaking program that would link property owners of vacant properties with interested prospective buyers. So that has been a number of tools, and we continue to target redevelopment of vacant properties more broadly through our enforcement programs as well. We are approaching this very much as a carrot and stick type of approach, and it has yielded some results in terms of stimulating redevelopment of strategic parcels.
Okay, I'm just curious to probably Steve Carson. I saw in the media maybe a week or two ago about some investors that were at a Calgary, I believe it was Calgary, and they had bought one of the larger properties on Prince William Street, I believe.
That's correct.
So I was thinking about that. So did that property come into their line of sight by first going through Develop St. John, or did they find it through a traditional means of just seeing it on a real estate listing site somewhere?
Yes, that property with Bank of Canada building, the former Bank of Canada building on Prince William Street, has been listed for sale for some time. So they currently have other investments in the community, and we've been talking to them about other opportunities, but they would have been aware of that primarily through the real estate community and having it listed as a property. We continue to work with them in terms of some reinvestment in that site, and there's some city-owned land adjacent to that site that may be able to be incorporated into a larger project for further reinvestment. So we'll continue to, but the quick answer to your question is that there would have been primarily driven to that site through it being listed on through real estate.
So I understand what all of you are saying, and it all makes sense, absolutely. I just think if it's for sale, put a sign up on it. What does it hurt? I mean, some may call Develop St. John or the city and say, hey, listen, I want to buy something, I want to invest. What do you have? Great. And others might just, casually be browsing the real estate ads, and there's something there from the city of St. John. I just think, why don't we just cover all of our bases? And, the carrot and stick approach, like Jacqueline mentioned, I'm thinking, great. So let's cast lines everywhere and not limit ourselves to only one or two, approaches. That's all.
Yeah, good feedback, Ray. Okay, anything else, Councillor? You're all set, Councillor?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Good feedback. Appreciate it. Okay, I didn't see Councillor McKenzie. Yeah, sorry. Go back over to you, Councillor. Go ahead.
Yeah, just very quickly on that third bullet about the street closure. I'm assuming, but I don't like to assume, that one of the options that you're considering, Phil, is after 6 on Friday till Sunday night closure so that the offices aren't affected, whether they be, lawyers or doctors or whatever. That's one of the options.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of varieties of the options, Councillor McKenzie. But just to remind you, the two kind of primary focuses of it would be to drive volume to businesses when they're open, evidently. So that would be one, and also just to drive broader volume, not necessarily just to businesses, but into the area from another area in order to increase businesses' opportunity to invite them into their business. So kind of twofold, all while also preserving the opportunity for some parking if need be. So, it might be a hybrid that comes in, and we've also talked about rotating. So listen, it's one of the variety of aspects of street closure that could be integrated about the timing. And some would be better served depending on how much capacity is needed from staff to make it happen, and to preserve the safety of the citizens and the businesses that use it.
Okay, well, I was very surprised to hear that it was 50-50 split on that. And I can only assume that it's 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, that would be opposed to it. I just wanted to make sure that option is on the table. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'll just give some quick feedback and then we'll move on. I'll start with the end to build on Councillor McKenzie's piece. So just late yesterday, and perhaps you've not seen it yet, Phil, Uptown St. John, many groups have been doing a lot of surveying in the last while. Uptown St. John just finished their survey. I got it late yesterday afternoon. I will forward it to all of you. And just to speak to that, I would say it's not a 50-50 split, Councillor, on the items to help businesses in the Uptown. And they're in ranked order: free parking, enhanced public signage, public seating in vicinity of business, designated parking spot for curbside pickup, wider pedestrian rights of way, then street closures, then larger patio space. So second from the bottom. So just to speak to the complexity of this, but I'll send you the whole slide deck. It's quite, it's thoughtful. It just means it's complicated. And as others were chatting about, while we were chatting, I remembered that they were doing a survey and I got it late yesterday afternoon. So it'll speak to, and it'll provide you some insight to some of the information that was spoken about today. So first of all, thank you. Thank you to all of the agencies. There's been a tremendous amount of work. Obviously our own staff, Develop St. John, Discover St. John, Economic Development Greater St. John, the Chamber of Commerce, Uptown St. John. Everybody's been really, really working day and night over the last number of weeks and months. Our world has been put on its head, and we're trying to figure out the path forward. And we're going to make some people happy and some people unhappy, and that's just the reality. And I think everybody's had some really fantastic comments for you today, Phil, Jacqueline, Amy, and others. My comments again are, how do we get, and I'll just rapid fire through these, but how do we give citizens that opportunity to give us feedback? I think that's critically important. Some of us are very active in social media. We're getting tagged on a multiple times per day. What about this idea? What about that idea? What about a revolving grocery store in neighborhoods? What about buses as restaurants? We're just getting rapid fire ideas. So could there be a bucket? Could there be a send your great ideas to Recovery 2020? Could there be some mechanism that I appreciate needs to be cost effective, but we've got a lot of really creative, engaged citizens that want to be part of this. And the deputy mentioned a bunch of groups out there that want to be part of this. So please think about, on top of the agencies, how we can help, how we can allow citizens also to be a part of this. While I understand that these are very challenging times, how do we preserve value for taxpayers in the services we provide, quality of life, arts, economic recovery, beautification? I know the city manager is going to tell us on Monday, and I get it, absolutely get it. We've got a bunch of budget constraints, but my gosh, I can't think of a time where King Street being beautiful hasn't been more important. So if we can't afford it, just being crazy here, can we get the flower groups? Can David and I adopt that flower garden? Can someone else adopt another flower garden? I don't know. I'm just using it as an illustrative example. So the theme for 2020, and I know you are, all of you, get creative in 2020. How do we just rapid fire, rapid lab, get creative, and building on the deputy's idea, maybe it's 250 for 50. We've got $250 grants available for gatherings of less than 50 people all over the city, hot dogs, barbecues, I don't know, whatever we can do within the rules, but we do things that we would normally never do. But we just say, you know what? We're going to invest $10,000 in our 250 for 50 grants plan for 2020 because, gosh darn it, skipping and painting faces and all those things are going to be really important to try and help people get through this. Alignment of all the amazing organizations we have, and I know you've been working hard on that, Phil. So I think that's going to be critically important, that these organizations come together and that we work through a lens of economic, social, cultural recovery here, and that we somehow thrive. I think that's going to be important. I guess, I know we're going to be short on time today. I'm really curious, through you, Phil, city manager, and other commissioners on the line today, I'm really going to be curious in the next month or two, what did we think was going to kill us pre-COVID or in the first week of COVID, that actually now we're saying, you know what? We're actually better now. So we're going to actually build on this. We're going to actually enhance our services. And thank you, COVID-19. You made us better. So I'd like to hear about that at a future growth committee meeting. I'd like to call myself a glass half full realist. I think it's really important that we plan for good, better, best, or multiple scenarios. I think there's some storm clouds on the horizon, which is why it's so critically important that we move forward on these types of plans. So I think accurate data is incredibly important. You shared some data with us today, but for for growth, for finance, and for city operations overall, what data is going to be critically important as we move forward. And only a couple more comments, but I was thinking about Disney, city manager, and everybody else. Disney World, Disneyland. I don't know which one's in Florida. But culturally, I know you have been doing a lot of work on our culture of customer service. But in a time of COVID and COVID recovery, and in a time recognizing that we're restructuring, we've got people in a whole bunch of angst, but we have 900 some employees. What role can our employees play? What policies need to be changed to make sure that everybody understands we're ambassadors? Every phone call, every interaction on the street, everything that we're doing, that we understand our job, city manager, using your words, is to facilitate over regulate, to be faster than we were 2 months ago, and to really just be that facilitator, smile on our face, even if we're not feeling all that great that day, to really move through it. So speeding up the process. And I guess the last three comments I have to you, maybe Phil and everyone else, there's a lot of sensitivity around the uptown. We all get it, I think, on this call, why having a thriving core is so critically important. But please keep a community-wide lens as we think about initiatives on the east side and the west side and the, in the north end and Milledgeville and all of these places in some balance here, because there's quite a bit of sensitivity around uptown. So yes, we need a strong uptown, but we also need to think about the whole community. And I guess I'll just finish with, I'm really sensitive, and we're going to have this conversation next, about the growth reserve. We've never had one. We finally got it built up. I know you're going to share some criteria here next, Phil, on how we very carefully would invest our growth reserve. I'm not interested in, and no one is suggesting this, getting one of those machines that shoots out $100 bills on the streets, but, just investing wisely. Yes, investing in recovery and so on, but being smart and careful. And so I guess it's balancing going fast, but being smart and understanding and managing outcomes. So pretty excited. Thank you for all the work you've done. I think in one way or another, each counselor has touched on fast, smart, being part of the solution, getting and consulting with the various stakeholders, including citizens, working on pride, and understanding that we're not going to be able to make everybody happy, but let's make some rapid decisions here. And as you said, Phil, each month driving some new initiatives forward. So sorry for all the rapid fire, but that would be my feedback. Okay. So we had a receive and file. No, sorry, we had the recommendations. I can't see you all, Phil. Sorry, just for a sec. We had the recommendations on the floor on that first piece, so I'll call the question on that piece. All those in favor? Okay, thank you. And anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing or hearing anybody, so thank you. Next item, Phil. You're muted, Phil. There.
Just bear with me here as I try to get the next presentation going. Wrong one. Can everybody see this presentation on growth reserve?
I can, Phil, yep.
Okay. So through you, Your Worship, to committee members, this presentation will just walk you through where we're at with the growth reserve, criteria for investing that 80% of the growth reserve on uncommitted funds, and hopefully it will generate a conversation about how we want to condition ourselves into the future to commit to this type of distribution of funding. So to get started, how much money do we have, and what's the amount? So as of April 15th, we had $928,000 of funds in the growth reserve. Committed and active, what that means is that council has already committed through resolution to spend that money, and that staff are already proceeding with it. So there's 245,000 of that. So to define what is uncommitted, in terms of nobody has claimed that money, it's still in play and it's available. There's 682,834. So council passed a resolution that said, let's use 80% of those uncommitted funds to support economic recovery. So how I got to 546,267 is through taking 80% of that total uncommitted funds. So just as a kind of information item, for the next 2 years, it is contemplated that growth reserve will not be replenished with a $350,000 annual investment. So what that means is outside of the economic recovery, we'll have $136,000 approximately for 2 years that currently has not been assigned or committed. So for today, we need to think about how do we strategically invest this $546,000 from the growth reserve to stimulate and contribute to economic and community recovery. One slide you already aware of, and I will be very short on this, is that this is not just about today. It is also about tomorrow, and it's also about a distant future as well, where we are trying to use these funds to unlock a whole bunch of support for our community. So the next slides basically breaks down objectives and criteria. So first off, and I've also a slide that I like to put into presentations, which often people do not, is what this is not. So I also want to try to define what I believe this funding program should not be. So evidently, everything should be evaluated through a set criteria, which I will share with you. It should align with the city's economic and community recovery efforts, as you've just received a briefing on. Receive policy level approval from Growth Committee and, of course, from Common Council for distribution, and inevitably support the outcomes of population tourism and tax-based growth. It should also support the commercial and cultural districts most impacted by COVID-19, as defined in the maps that David shared earlier today. It is for a period of time, as discussed. We want to try to attempt to leverage additional funding through partners and in private sector, if possible, on these funding. So if we can use $1 and make it $5, or $1 and make it $3, yeah, absolutely. That should be definitely a part of the objective. This one's important. Focus on municipal programming, assets, facilities, and investments. So often I'm hearing and discussing this is, well, why doesn't the city, mimic the Trudeau government's loan program? That is not something that cities have the authority or jurisdiction to do. It is not necessarily something that is accustomed to the city to do, nor do we have the financial backing to do that type of initiative. So I think it's really important to think about it. What can we do with what we're well positioned to do and within our authority? I think is a really important piece. So we have programming, assets, facilities, and investments. So in terms of criteria, I've identified 8 different criteria, and you basically have to look at this like, if we were to come to you today and say, hey, we want $50,000, staff think we have $50,000 to invest, we would feed it through this criteria and tell you whether we think it passes that test to allow for it. And we want to commit to this today so that we know when we come to you, we're not coming to you with, well, this is Phil's favorite project and he really likes it. He's really excited about it. And that's not what we want. We want this to be fair for everybody and for all options. So listen, support increased volume. That's something that is indicated. We want to increase volume for these areas that are impacted. We want to support the largest quantity of impacted organizations and businesses and uphold fairness. So what that means is, if we say our whole strategy is to close down one street between Germain Street between King and Princess, and that's it. Well, that's not really fair. That's like one little small area for a much broader audience. We need the internal capacity to plan and execute it. It needs to be pilotable because we will probably make mistakes. We will try to do something and it doesn't work. So we want the ability to discontinue it quickly if need be, but we also want to be the ability to scale it up if it's really successful and figure out how to do that in different areas of the city if need be. It's got to be affordable from a goods and services standpoint. It has to uphold safety for users and the businesses and organizations that are involved. It has to be feasible to implement. So, if we're looking at something that would require a 6-month engagement strategy, I'd probably indicate that is not an easy and feasible for implementation. And lastly, the initiative must be temporary and cannot result in recurring expenses for the City of St. John. So this is the one that folks will probably be more provocative, because I think it's important to indicate what it's not. It is not a duplicate of federal, provincial, and existing local programming. Funding should not support the normal operations of service delivery of St. John and ABC programming. It should not offset the impacts as a result of COVID-19 financial analysis or the city's sustainability efforts. And it should not offset municipal administrative fees. What that means is, these revenue streams that come in. But, I do put the caveat that only exceptional situations could be considered for that. The recommendation that is part of this report is to adopt the Growth Reserve Fund objectives and criteria for economic recovery investments, and that would then become our kind of sub policy, as the Finance Committee and Council has already adopted a reserve policy. This would be basically a subset of that to define how to draw from that 80% of uncommitted funds from that 546. So that was the recommendation today to then transfer over to Council for their consideration. And we are available for questions or comments if you do, and I will take off the sharing.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Questions, comments, colleagues? Deputy?
Well, just wondering, is it like for anything? Like, is it for a private business that if they decided they needed some help with whatever, even buying protective equipment for their staff, does it cover that? Is it like for nonprofits? Is it for any organization at all in the city? And how do we determine, like, this is taxpayers' money, so can we just like talk like the mayor was talking about different events here and there and whatever, which are very important? Can people apply for those types of things, or just how in-depth does an application have to be? Is there going to be an application? Can you explain just a little bit more like that, and who will approve it? Like, it has to be approved fairly quickly if it's going to be of help this summer.
Great question, Deputy Mayor. I'll answer in kind of two parts. Number one, the presentation you received on community and economic recovery is linked to this. So you will be receiving recommendations from the work that we're doing. We will be doing the work. We will be collecting information from the business community and from the cultural communities to figure out what's the best way to do it. And we will recommend drawing from that growth reserve with these criteria in order to do that. I would remind you, we do not have an idea of distributing all these funds and asking every community member and every business to apply for us. We do not have the intention. That is not one of the ideas. And the reason for that is that the city has not historically done that. That is federal and provincial who have more often, and they have the financial capacity to do that. And you do see some programming at the Uptown St. John level as well for that. We're not looking to duplicate those programs, and that is not historically something we've taken on. So we do not intend to give out small amounts to everybody. We will be focused, as indicated in the criteria for this, as well as the prior presentation, on what we've historically done, what is our authority, and how can we unlock our investments, infrastructure, programming, facilities to enable that particular volume to be brought to those businesses. And I think that's the best way that we can support the cultural and business sectors.
City manager wants to jump in there, Phil, for a second. Go ahead. City manager.
Your worship, the deputy mayor brings up a great point. I think it's fundamental to understanding the approach that we're taking with this growth reserve. First of all, we need to remember that it is a reserve, and therefore it is guided by the reserve policy of the city of St. John, and the only people who can authorize expenditures out of it is Common Council. So yes, everything will be going back to Common Council. That said, I think it's also very important to recognize that of every tax dollar collected in this country, 90% of it goes to the provincial and federal level, and only 10% of it goes to the municipal level. Put another way, it's the provincial and federal level who have the ability and the tax revenue to be able to consider help to businesses and help to special interest groups. This is not what the growth reserve money has been tagged for. Ours is to help with the recovery efforts, both community recovery and business recovery. But we certainly I don't see a situation where we would come to council with a recommendation to directly subsidize a business or to directly subsidize any other group that normally receives its funding from the provincial or federal level. It's mission creep. It's an area where we should not go. And with only $550,000 available to us for our help to the recovery efforts, quite frankly, we couldn't afford to go there even if we wanted to. And I just need to keep that in context. So no, I don't see a situation where we would be coming to council recommending direct funding to someone who can get their assistance from the other levels of government where it rightfully belongs.
So if we approve this, then, and I don't know, some idea come up or somebody came up with an idea or whatever, then it would come back, staff would look at it, then it would come to council eventually for approval. So I guess I'm fine with that. The other area I'm conscious of, and it's already been brought up today, is that even though the uptown is our core, and that's where a lot of visitors go, we also have to be conscious of the rest of the city, that they have an opportunity, if anybody has a suggestion or, something comes up, that they would get help too.
That's where the fairness clause comes in as one of the criteria. Phil gave an example of fairness where you only focus on one area, but the other considerations of fairness are, is our effort being spread across the entire community, as the mayor mentioned in the last presentation. So it is one of the criteria. All we're looking for today is support for those criteria and support for what the objectives are. And then again, we would take every idea, either our own self-generated ones or ones that we receive from the community, and we would push it through that criteria and see whether it satisfies the objectives as well. And then we would bring recommendations to council. And
then if any of this money is spent this year, then that would go back in the growth committee, I guess.
Right.
There would be terms and conditions on the spending of the money. We'd know how much time we're giving them. Again, there was nothing in the recommendation of using 80% of the growth reserve that was tied to a timeline or to this calendar year. And quite frankly, I'm actually quite hopeful that we don't spend all $550,000 of it in the next 4 or 5 months, because we know that our recovery efforts will be much longer than that. So I think we need to take a very pragmatic and cautious approach in the expenditure of those funds, because they are very limited.
Yep. Sorry, I've got to jump in, Deputy. We've got one more presentation, so I just want to try to get through this one and then get to our next presentation.
Well, I move the recommendation.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy. Do I have a seconder, please? Okay. Thank you, Councillor McKenzie. Councillor Strobridge, you had a comment?
I just had a question here, and maybe I'm missing some information. Maybe I missed something in the past, but Growth reserve fund, the total funds in it as of April 15th are $128,000. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. 245 is committed of that. So uncommitted is 682.
Okay. So how did we end up with an envelope of almost $1 million sitting somewhere when we are, $10 million in the hole?
So, city manager, do you want to jump in? We've canceled our growth reserve for the next 2 years. Go ahead, city manager.
So, a decision of council many years ago was to build up reserves. One of the reserves that was decided to build up was a growth reserve for unique growth, non-recurring. So not to replace normal budgeting process, but unique, non-recurring ideas to help with the council's priority on growth. And the decision was made that on an annual basis, $350,000 would go into that reserve fund to build it up. That the buildup was faster or greater than the spend, and the growth reserve has been spent, or it has been tapped into for a number of different initiatives over the years, but it's built up faster than we have spent it, which is a good thing. And quite frankly, I think this growth reserve is an excellent example of why we need reserves. We have now hit a COVID-19 kick in the backside thing that's going to dramatically affect growth in the economy in the city, and we have a reserve that can now deal with it. We will expend most of the reserve, and it will have to be built back up again. But there is another decision of council that for the next 2 years, because of the sustainability challenges that we do have, that no additional money is going into the growth reserve. So the standard $350,000 that goes in every year has been suspended for the calendar years of 2021 and 2022 based on the decision of council last week.
Okay. So we're not spending it. The money is sitting there basically in a savings account, not being spent, which is a good thing. I agree. But when we're $10 million behind the 8 ball, which is what everything we've been working on, why do we think it's okay to then open up this money for community initiatives or something like that? I mean, we're 10 million bucks in the hole and we're sitting on over $500,000. And I understand we want to try to stimulate the economy a little bit. I totally get that. But I'm just thinking to myself, it says, that money, I guess it's a council policy of this, that the money can't be used for operational expenses as an example. Well, I'm just thinking to myself, we're $10 million in the hole. We're sitting on over $500,000. I'm like, turn off all the taps. There's no free money right now because we don't have it. So if we've got this money sitting in a savings account somewhere, without getting off topic, because I'm sure everybody could go any way they want, why should that money not be going towards our $10 million deficit, as an example, instead of having to lay off another $1 million in employee reductions, as an example? I just don't get it.
I suppose the short answer to that is the $10 million deficit is annual recurring.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to find things that will eliminate the cost annually. What you're suggesting of tapping into the growth reserve for $500,000 is a moment in time solution. It does not solve the problem that the 10 million is annual recurring. It might help us a little bit in 2021, but we have the same problem in 2022 and we will have no money at that point. So the sustainability plan for the $10 million is we had to find initiatives that would permanently reduce our operating costs on an annual basis by $10 million. A simple one-time injection of funds does nothing to achieve that. Again, I get back to the point of having a bit of a savings account, to use your term, but having a bit of a reserve in place is important so that we do not completely destroy our budgets in any given year. We have an operating reserve, for example, for the next snowmageddon. We had this growth reserve. We continue to have the growth reserve that, quite frankly, I couldn't be happier that this council had put money aside for potential growth initiatives, because if there was ever a case to, or an argument to be used to use that money, it's now post-COVID-19. So again, the one-time injections would not at all solve the $10 million annual recurring. And that's the main reason why we've not considered simply bleeding dry our reserves that we've worked so hard over the years to build up, because it needs to be annual recurring savings that we achieve.
Okay, city manager, I see your point, and I don't disagree with you at all on that. So give me some examples on who a successful applicant would be to get money out of this.
So
And how is that going to stimulate the economy?
yeah, so I don't think we're even, city manager can answer your question, Councillor, but I don't even know that we're there yet. Today, what we're debating is the criteria itself. Every one of those applications will come back to you and us as a committee and as council. So today it's this is the criteria that's being recommended for how we would evaluate using some of the growth reserve for its intent, really for its intention, which is to stimulate growth, maintain growth in the city. So that's really what the debate is for today.
And I understand that. I guess I'm just not buying into it.
Right.
I'm really not. And I think the public perception out there, despite the great points
Your worship.
made, I'm just like, whoa.
Okay.
You know, I'm not buying into this. So that's all.
Okay. We got you. Thank you. Sorry. Was that you, Councillor McKenzie?
Yes, your worship. I completely understand where the council is coming from, but on a point of order, we've already dealt with the $10 million at our last meeting, and this conversation should have taken place prior to that motion going through. And as you said, this is not the time and place for this anymore.
Okay. Thank
Sorry.
you. Thank you very much. Okay, perfect. So just a couple of quick comments and then we'll call the question.
Hey, Your Worship, if I could just debate Councillor McKenzie's point of order, this policy wasn't brought forward before the sustainability vote 2 weeks ago.
Right.
You know. So anyway, but I get his point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Look, so I will just add a comment, folks. So thanks for the discussion. My comment would be a couple comments. First of all, I think this is thoughtful. Thank you. I've been concerned about this. We've all expressed some appreciation and some level of concern. I was concerned. I'm less concerned. I think this is quite thoughtful, actually. Thank you. I like the criteria. It's not a blank check. We're not just going to spend the money. The hat we have on here today is about growth. We're going to be thoughtful about that. You're going to, continue to push forward and see, is this a worthy investment to help us continue to grow? And I don't make my next comment to debate with Councillor Strobridge and his comment, but just to say, it would be my view that, what we would have done in the past is I think there are two separate conversations is what I would say. Yes, we have operational challenges and we're dealing with those challenges. But what we would have done in the past is we would have bled out any reserve if we had it. We wouldn't have had a reserve. We would have added debt. So I'm really pleased that we do have these reserves. And I do like the criteria. It's thoughtful. And I think there's a safeguard in place in that everybody on this call and the rest of council will get to debate any idea that you bring forward to draw down on that reserve. So I think for today, you've brought forward a good criteria, my opinion, and we'll look forward to the ideas that you bring forward. So, okay, I'm going to call the question on the recommendation or the criteria then. All those in favor, please show me a hand. Okay, thank you. And anyone contrary-minded? Okay, thank you, Councillor Strobridge. The motion is carried. And our last item, we will turn over to Mr. Fogan to present an overview of a 10-year strategic plan. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Your Worship. Committee. Yeah, I'll take you through this quickly, hopefully quickly enough so we can get out of here and still have time for some questions, but hopefully keep you riveted right through your lunch hour. Let's see if I can share this. Yeah, I trust everybody can see what's what I'm on my screen.
Yep.
So this is to lead you through the strategic planning process. I just want to explain what we're doing. So this was the recommendation from your sustainability plan you adopted on May the 4th. It was to direct the city manager to develop a 10-year vision and strategy document that we use to guide all further decision-making and subordinate policy development for the city of St. John. Direct the city manager to maintain and update all policy documents on an as-required basis. And direct the city manager to prepare for the development of the next council's 4-year priorities. So in part, in this presentation, I hope to guide you through a little bit of what is the strategic planning process, why is it important, what are the parts of the plan, and that, like I said, that process, and also get your feedback on what's being presented. First off, what is strategic planning? It's really the organization's process of defining its strategy. That block is blocking your view to the entire presentation. Sorry about that. Process defining a strategy or direction and making decisions to allocate the resources to pursue that strategy. Just a couple of quotes here. Probably you've heard them before. Failing to plan is planning to fail. A goal without a plan is just a wish. So really it functions like a roadmap. You look at a corporate plan as a business improvement plan. It examines our internal capabilities to take advantage of external opportunities. If I use the analogy of a race as an example, you really need to know which direction you're going. You may already be the fastest runner, but are you going in the right direction? And what did you do in order to become that fast runner? What did you train? Did you buy the right pair of shoes? You know, what's your schedule? So why is it important? Why should we be doing this? Why should anybody care if we're doing this? Well, it really allows an organization to be proactive rather than reactive. It sets our direction. It communicates our priorities to the community and other stakeholders. It communicates your direction to staff. It increases our operational efficiency, drives organizational alignment, and also helps build the brand. Once you establish a vision and a mission and we start getting down that road and accomplishing some of the things that you're going to set out, this really helps to build a brand. At least sets a brand that a vision, a plan towards a brand that you want to accomplish. This was part of the May the 4th presentation, and just kind of shows you where this plan sits in relation to other plans. It's really the long-term vision and strategy document. It should feed into all your other plans, and your other plans should also feed into it. It also takes into account things like your organizational objectives, the environment that we operate in, and also council priorities. This is just to demonstrate where, when we adopt the strategic plan and the plan is followed, we should ensure that the goals of the long-term financial plan are met. It should coincide, sit side by side, and accomplish that goal. So why is it important for the city of St. John? Well, like I said previously, it really helps guide other existing plans. It helps build new ones. You help identify where there's policies or gaps that might exist. Through this planning process, you may identify that you're lacking an HR strategic plan, or maybe a public safety strategic plan. So this all-encompassing strategy document will help do that. But also it helps fulfill some of your other plans that you already have in existence. If I take, for example, Play ASJ, you've adopted, you said you want to implement, but your strategic plan will contain exactly the actions to help you support those other plans. This is just a quick slide to show you the sections of a plan. We should have an executive summary. We'll have inputs to the plan, and I'll explain what a pestle and a squat are. And then the main plan itself, which should contain a vision, mission, your strategic goals, your short, medium, long-term objectives, and also the tactics or actions that you're going to adopt in order to achieve those strategic objectives. What's a pestle? A pestle is really your external environmental analysis. I use the word environment to be all-encompassing, but the environment in specific is a portion of your pestle analysis. So it stands for political, economical, social, your technological, environmental, and legal. So we do a snapshot of what all that external environment looks like, and we use it as an input to your strategic planning process. As an practical example of this, but actually before I move on, if let's say in your legal analysis, you clearly have defined what you have the capability of a counselor as an organization to adopt, your legal analysis is important to feed into that, to let you know what you can and can't do. Unlike everybody's probably heard the term SWOT before: your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but really we're looking at how do we use our strengths in order to take advantage of opportunities that are out there, and also to combat any threats that may exist. Next, we lead in really what is the heart of the plan. So you have those inputs, now you want to build a plan. This is really the heart of it. You contain your vision, your mission, goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics. And I'll go into each one just a little bit, explain each step, but look at it from a pyramid standpoint. Your vision should be broad, and there's one vision. And when you get down to the bottom of this pyramid, your tactics or your actions, they'll be very specific, and there'll be many of them. First, your vision. Why is a vision important? Well, I think it's important, like I said before, but that branding. You know, what do you want the city of the future to be like? What role should the city play in that future? And how should the city be different than it is now? It's really about a vision, is setting that vision as to how you want the outcome to be. When you talk about a mission statement is a little different. A statement indicates where the city plans, what the city plans to do and how it will be done. The statement indicates the reason the city exists. The mission statement serves as the basis for development of the city's focus areas or issues, outcomes, and strategies. So when developing a mission statement, it should be exciting, inspiring, motivating. It should be short and concise. And it should answer the following questions: who are you as an organization? Why do you exist? And what do you do? Who do you serve? A lot of times people get confused between the two parts. What's a vision? What's a mission? The difference is really the mission is what are you doing now? And the vision is what do you want to become? We'll go through these different parts of the plan as well. Once you have your vision, which is what you want to become, your mission is what you're doing now. What goals do you specifically want to develop out of this? They should be aligned with your vision and your mission. And these should be SMART goals. So you don't want to be conflicting in your goals. You don't want to have one goal that says, I want to increase, I want to build a large new expensive facility, but at the same time, I want to decrease debt. So you have to be smart about how you establish your goals, and also following that those SMART objectives. In the example here, you could set a goal that maybe one of your goals is to increase population. And I'll use this example throughout to show you how that will apply if that was a goal that you established. So the next part is your objective. So it's really how you're going to reach that goal as you go down this ladder. So it's still a long-term, it sets the goals you established, and it should be aligned again with your vision and mission. Again, if your goal previously was to increase population, maybe an objective, then you say, well, first off, I need to make sure we don't lose people. So I'm going to increase retention and reduce out migration. That could be an objective, relates to your overall goal of population increase. Next, you want to set a strategy. So how are you going to increase retention of your people, which leads to higher population? In this example, and this is just an example, it may not be applicable at all, but perhaps your evidence says that the best way to retain people and to prevent out-migration is to build the best parks. Maybe your information has shown that your parks are the most important thing that people need in order to stay here. So if that were true, which I'm not saying it is, but if that were true, then a strategy would be, all right, then we need to build the best parks. Then the next level down would be the specific tactics. So how do we go about building those best parks? In this example, we'd say, well, maybe you need to increase capital investment in parks. And then the important part of this hierarchy, if you follow along, it would be that they're all linked. you're increasing your capital investment in parks in order to build the best parks, and in order to meet your objective is to retain people, in order to increase population, which is your goal, which aligns with your mission, and your vision. So there are many tools out there for reporting on performance, and really there's two things that you need measured. One is, are you conforming to this plan? And the second one is really your overall performance of the corporation, and they both should be reported on. As far as performance management of the plan, the idea is that we would report yearly as to whether or not you're abiding by the tactics that you've implemented. Are they leading to your strategy? Are they helping to support your objective? Are they leading to your goal? If it's not accomplishing your goal, then where's the gap? Why is there a gap there? And again, this is a continuously 10-year outlook. So if we built one this year, it might be for the year 2030. If you did it next year, it'd be for the year 2031. So again, like I said, are you accomplishing your goal? Is there a gap? Are you headed towards your expected outcome? And if not, then you need to adjust your strategy and your tactics. You need to evaluate the data you're collecting and or perhaps tweak your metrics. So it's a constant monitoring and control. This is a live document that will be constantly feed into your action plans every year, but also adjust your goals in the long term. The other part of it is measuring your corporate performance. So Stephanie Racker-Roach and her corporate performance team, they'll be developing a complete performance measurement framework. And that will be developed with KPIs to feed into a balanced scorecard. A balanced scorecard is one of those examples that I showed on the previous slide, but what we may use as for reporting. Key to that is how you collect the data. And it's important to measure both leading and lagging indicators. And this is all this slide is meant to show you. I'll use safety as an example, which is one that we commonly use as to what a leading and lagging indicator may be. In order to accomplish our safety program, we have tailgate talks and we evaluate workspaces to make sure they're safe. And we measure then how often we do that. Are we 100% compliance with our safety program? That would be a leading indicator. A lagging indicator then would be what is our result? Are we seeing less workplace injuries? Are we working in a safe environment? So it's important to measure both. So the process, this is what the process will look like. Our goal is to get this going in June and have wrapping up by the end of the year, so this could be adopted by council before 2021 to feed into a 2021 work plan. The important piece here is that we will be engaging, doing some public consultation and stakeholder engagement. And just what that looks like at this point in time, we're still putting our minds to that, but we will be back to this committee and finance committee to report on what our stakeholder engagement plan may look like and what our public consultation may look like. You can imagine as we evolve through our recovery from COVID-19, I think, well, it could be every 2 weeks at the public consultation or stakeholder engagement. That could change. So we'll come back, but we'll plan for that. So who will be writing the plan? Well, key staff obviously are going to be conducting workshops and engaging in consultation. We'll have input from senior leadership teams. I think both the finance and growth committees both need to provide input from citizens. We're looking to provide monthly updates on this process and the plan. Obviously, this committee and finance committee should be involved in a workshop to establish our vision and our mission. Hopefully, like I said, we'll have a presentation to council by the end of this year if everything goes well. This is just a snapshot of what a stakeholder engagement timeline will look like, or some components of it. But I'll be back with a more detailed process on public consultation and stakeholder engagement. This is just a quick slide to show how your long-term vision and strategy is perhaps a little different than your council priorities. One is more long-term, the other is more short-term. Your long-term vision and strategy should be a 10-year document. Over that same time period, you have, in theory, 2.5 different councils. Although this one we ran into a 5-year, I guess, but in all theory, 2.5. So they should influence each other. So council's priorities should influence the long-term strategic plan, which would be adopted annually and modified annually, but also the long-term strategic plan should also influence council priorities. So if it's already been set for a 10-year period, when you're going through your council priority section, you would inform council on what the long-term strategy looks like. If they don't want to support it, if they want to go off in a different direction, then we report that, okay, well, a new plan needs to be adopted, it would be modified, but it would all provide that input. So these would flow back and forth between the two. One's a little more short-term, the other is a little more long-term. Again, council's priorities are a little bit more short-term. They focus on outcomes. What changes do we envision for our community? They set the direction for the next 4 years. They really relate to people and at the heart of what we do. And they focus on St. John's citizens and the investments that their services want and what we need to achieve their goals. Again, this is your current council priorities. And I will say, if we don't have a new council in the fall, which I'm not sure if there'll be an election in the fall or not, the idea right now is to use your current council priorities as an input to the strategic plan. Like I said, it is a live document, be adopted every year, so that in future councils would certainly have an input to the strategic plan once a new council is set as well. And with that, I kind of burned through it a little quickly. I know we're a little more pressed for time, so if there's any feedback this committee would like to give or any input, certainly open to that now, or any questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Ian. You'll stop sharing your screen, please. Okay, thank you for that. It's a lot of information. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Well, I have no problem with a 10-year plan or a 10-year vision, but what if we took on the task, say we wanted to concentrate on our streets, for instance, and this would be the entire city, wanted to have the best streets ever, or that could be one example, or another one could be like, how would you do it for infrastructure? Like, how would you do it so that on certain streets, you'd probably have to divide it then and just make sure that there's no issues or structures that look on, in a dilapidated manner. I mean, how would you do that? That'd be such a big undertaking. I mean, are you thinking about items like that? Like, I've often heard, I can remember when we used to interview people for like a city manager's job in our city. I remember one time a number of years ago, I think everybody that came in from another city said, "Oh, you people don't spend money on your infrastructure. This is crumbling, that's crumbling, whatever." Is that what you're talking about, that we could take on an issue that you're going to focus on and fix that whole area up? I mean, it would take us forever.
Sorry, let me jump in on this one. I'm reminded of one of my favorite sayings: a vision without resources is nothing but hallucination. As we work through this process, and we don't know yet what our goals and objectives would be, we have a pretty good idea because we've been talking about it for a very long time. We, for all intent and purpose, have a strategic plan, but it's just never been properly articulated. But certainly, as we go through what the possibilities are as staff that we would eventually bring forward to council for recommendation after a lot of stakeholder engagement, as Ian mentioned, it would very much have to be put into the context of the financial realities of the city, because otherwise it's nothing but a hallucination. So I know Ian gave the example of the best parks in the world. You just gave an example of the best streets in the world. We may end up with a strategy document that says we're not going after best just yet. In the next 10 years, we're going after something less than best. But again, all of that is to be determined, Deputy Mayor. And through the consultation process, we do need to figure out what our objectives are, what our goals are, and a way to quantify those goals. Because again, vision without resources is hallucination.
I would also just add, it creates that alignment, Deputy Mayor. Like, if your vision in your to establish is that you have streets without any, or if that's, I guess your vision would be more broad than that. But it all has to be aligned. So if your goal is to have the best streets, then your tactics every year are maybe they are invest, but you can't have conflicting tactics either. So and conflicting goals. If you don't want to increase debt, then you have a reality here that you have to come to terms with how those goals might conflict.
But if I wanted to go through on this, I would want something to be the best. I mean, otherwise it just doesn't count. Like maybe we could be the cleanest city. Maybe every time somebody dropped a piece of garbage, we could fine them. Because, in some cities, that happens. You're not allowed to drop garbage. You can't go to McDonald's and have a takeout and then put the garbage on the street. And people do that. Believe it or not, educated people do that all the time. Not fair to others. But if we were going to do this, I'd want to make sure that whatever you pick, you're going to be the best. Because otherwise, we have all kinds of things in our city now. And we're not necessarily the best on our parks because we don't have the money, or we're not the best on garbage cleanup because we don't have bylaws enforced to make people clean up garbage. So, anyways, just my thoughts. I would go for it if there's something we could pick that then we could be the best, and we'd probably have to put bylaws in place to have the community help us. But there's nothing wrong with doing that if we can enforce them at least a bit to make people be conscious of what they're doing. Just my thought.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. There'll be lots of consultation coming through the process. Councillor Hickey.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks, Ian, for the presentation. I would contend we can be the best at 10-year planning. I'm not sure we're in much other positions to be the best of anything quite yet, but it's certainly something we can take for. Certainly appreciate the process. Makes a lot of sense to me. It's certainly a change of reference point in terms of how we look at the future of our city, instead of just looking at 4-year segments or smaller. It gives us the benefit of being able to look more long term. Question outside of this just got me thinking about our council priorities document. Do we need to reaffirm that by any means now that our term has a little bit expired, but I guess we're still legislatively able to be here? I doubt it, but I was just curious.
Yeah.
It's normally we do develop council priorities with every new term. I would suggest that your council priorities are, this council hasn't stopped just because your term is continuing for a year.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Still is but again, this type of document would allow for annual adjustment if you find that for whatever reason your environment has changed. So COVID-19 comes up. If you were to adopt a strategic plan, you may have to adjust your short-term strategies or your goals in relation to that. So your priorities may not change, but maybe you're adopting a different strategic plan for next year for long term because of that.
And I guess it brings up another question for me. Obviously, we have no legislative power in terms of affirming a 10-year strategy, but do you have any insight on what that strategy can do to shape decision-making of future councils? Like, in 10 years, I'm probably not going to be around. We'll likely have a different mayor, things like that. Obviously, we have no legislative power to enforce that, but do you have any insight on what it can do to help shape that path forward?
Sure. No, that's a great question, actually. So setting a long-term strategy, and if you have that vision of what you want to be, and you set up your long-term goals and you implement these strategies, again, which are longer term, it really aligns your resources towards those end goals. So if a council came in, and this is with all due respect, like, this will be the issue for future councils to consider. If they came in and wanted to completely change direction 180, it would be responsibility of staff to say, well, wait a minute, we've aligned all our resources towards this 10-year strategy adopted by this previous one. We can't turn on a dime and go in a different direction. It will take us time to refocus, retool, turn around. And if you're expecting us to go in a completely different direction in a 4-year term, it's not going to happen. This really it does have that influence over short-term council priorities, in that it will make those short-term pivots and perhaps more difficult. But hopefully, we use the long-term strategies to influence these priorities. And again, we'll be changing them every year, so they'll have some influence still.
Perfect. Thank you. No, that's all for me. I think it certainly shows the power of that alignment. So it's good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, sorry, Deputy.
Well, is there a recommendation?
It's a receive and file, I think, for, yeah.
Okay, well, I'll move that.
Okay, moved and seconded by Councillor Mackenzie. Thank you. Just a couple of quick comments for me, and thank you again. I've had the pleasure of seeing this at Finance as well. I think just building on some of the comments you've already received, first of all, I think it's a very positive narrative that we need to continue to share with the public, with the province, that when you look at the work that we've done, this committee has done around growth, our roadmaps, the focus on population, turning the constant decline around to population growth, the finance work that we've done, long-term financial plans, policies, the focus we've put on transformational change. Now you add this to we're doing some really, by we, I mean you, with council oversight, doing some really great work. I think that one of the things that Councillor Hickey, I would say it a bit differently, that one of the biggest challenges that governments have is this constant starting and stopping and rudderless. One government says we're going to do this, the next government says we're going to undo that. I think it's very positive to say to the community, this is a 10-year vision, a 10-year plan, and the next council that comes better have a really good reason for not focusing on growth, the long-term financial plan, transformational change. So I think this is incredibly powerful document. We have to think long-term. We have to act long-term. The city manager has just talked about, and he had to drop off the call to go meet with the province, but you can talk all you want, but if you don't align resources with it, it's just talk. So I guess, again, rapid fire, Ian, a little bit like I said at Finance, you have to think about, how will this plan be different? I would like to see really strong intelligence so that we understand, how can we position, using the deputy's example, is it roads? Is it parks? Is it arts and culture? How do we position ourselves to be the place for people to live, work, play? What matters to millennials? What matters to seniors on low income? What matters to, so I think that I want to see really strong intelligence. Has to have a very strong work plan, the grind to implement the work plan. We have to have measurement of our progress that matters. We have to have ownership. Every single manager, every single employee should understand the role that they play. You talk about balanced scorecard. To me, that means not picking on senior managers, but that means that you don't get to be a manager without knowing that you have to manage your finances, your sustainability, your delivery of customer service culture. It's all inclusive. So ownership and tying it all together, that an agency or board that gets 10 or 20 million bucks doesn't just get to run off in a field somewhere and not understand that everything they're doing, not suggesting that anyone is, but understanding that we are all aligned in everything that we do. So, and then lastly, council's role in the governance and oversight, not down in the weeds, but the governance and oversight of this document. So I'm pretty pumped. I'm pretty excited about this. I think it's going to be, you've got a lot of work ahead of you. And lastly, I'll end with, I'm really excited to see the citizen engagement piece. It's critically important that our citizens, taxpayers, shareholders understand that this is their plan too. This is their city. We've got folks that think we do very good work, and with due respect, we've got some folks that think we don't do very good work. So, not going to argue on either side of that, but all right. Well, thank you for the presentation. We've got a receive and file. I'm not seeing anyone else that wants to jump in. I don't think so. I'll call that question. All those in favor, please show me a hand. Okay. And anyone contrary-minded? Not seeing or hearing anybody. Okay. So thanks. That was the last item, folks. Thank you very much. Thank you again to all of the staff that have been working through these unprecedented times, and look forward to the conversations to come. And thank you to all the committee members for being here today. Appreciate it. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Motion to adjourn.
Motion
Excellent.
adjourn.
Okay. Well, we'll assume everybody votes in favor of adjournment. Thank you, everybody.